Well, joining me now from Washington is Jackie Speier, a Democrat congresswoman who's lobbying the NFL for a change in their domestic violence policy. And from North Carolina, Bev Gooden, a survivor of domestic violence who started the Twitter campaign in support of victims. Bev Gooden first, what made you start that campaign on Twitter?
Well, when the video came out, the overwhelming response was asking Janae Rice why she stayed, asking her to justify why she chose what she chose, instead of pointing the finger at the person who committed the crime. So it's like we're asking victims to explain themselves for a crime against them. And so, having been through an abusive marriage myself, I related to her. I stayed with my ex-husband until I left. And so I wanted to give a voice to the survivors, to the people who felt the need that they had to explain themselves for the crimes against them, and I wanted to give them a voice. So I started the Why I Stayed hashtag just to explain the complexities of a domestic violence situation.
How hard was it for you to use your own voice to speak out about what had happened to you?
It was very difficult. It was really the first time that I had gone into any detail about it. Now my family knows it happened. It happened 4 years ago. And so now the world knows. And that was kind of difficult, but I felt the need to stand up for Janae Rice, for survivors of domestic violence, because everyone was pointing the finger at them, asking them to explain themselves. And I didn't feel that was right.
Jackie Speier, is it more troubling that it's taken the NFL so long to respond to all this, or are you encouraged by the public response, in particular the Bev Gooden's campaign?
I actually think that if a spotlight hadn't been placed on the NFL and if that video hadn't come out, this issue would continue to be one that was ignored by the NFL and swept under the rug. So their history is not a good one. Under Roger Goodell, they've had 56 players that have been charged with domestic violence, and their total penalty for all of those amounted to 13 suspended games. In some cases, they didn't even get a fine. Some of these were repeat offenders, I might add. So we have a serious problem, not just in the NFL, but in this country, where domestic violence affects about a third of the population of women in this country.
Well, Bev Gooden, I saw you nodding in agreement with that, but those figures are pretty shocking, aren't they? What do you think about the way the NFL has conducted itself in this?
I mean, I think they've handled it terribly. It took a video, for the world to see, for them to even really jump into action, any serious action. And I feel like it lessens the severity of the domestic violence issue, when it should be, there's a domestic violence situation. We are taking action right now, regardless of whether or not there's public outcry.
Well, Jackie Speier, ultimately, was this about the money? Was this about, a sport trying to keep its lucrative players on the pitch and, turning a blind eye to something as serious as domestic violence?
Of course it's about the money. And the only reason why, frankly, I think they're addressing it is because a lot of the sponsors now are thinking, well, do we really want to be sponsoring this team or sponsoring this player? And you've seen a number of sponsors actually cancel their contracts. If you look at the NFL, it is among the richest companies, so to speak, in the country. It tops out, it's within the top 105 companies. And if you look at Roger Goodell, he's just under the top 10 in terms of salary. So it's all about money here.
What do you hope to achieve by holding this congressional hearing that you're having?
Well, I think one of the things we need to do is look at the tax-exempt status which the NFL enjoys. Only 3 sports activities, PGA, that's the Golf Association, and the National Hockey League enjoy that. None of the other sports authorities enjoy that. I think we need to look at issues like steroid use, because there really is a link between, I believe, domestic violence and what's called roid rage. And I don't think that the NFL has been serious about testing for the use of growth hormones like they have changed in Major League Baseball. I also think we need to look at traumatic brain injury and the fact that so many of these players find out that once they retire, their lives are truly, they're very disabled in terms of the way they can conduct their lives.
Bev Gooden, Ray Rice has still got a lot of support, hasn't he? I mean, you might have heard the people speaking in that piece. Really, he's got a big fan base still. Does that disturb you?
Well, they all have fan
It
bases.
doesn't
We
disturb
love
me. I mean,
American
it kind of
football.
speaks to.
Sorry, go ahead, Bev.
Yeah, I think it speaks to, you know, the way that society views domestic violence. Even the NFL itself doesn't punish domestic violence issues as severely as they do, you know, a marijuana, you know, case or anything like that. And so the support just kind of goes both ways. The NFL isn't taking it seriously enough, and so society may not take it seriously enough. And we just need 360 degrees of accountability from society, from the law, and from the NFL.
Jackie Speier, the law has got to change in terms of the comparison of domestic violence punishment and marijuana punishment.
I'm sorry, the question again?
Has the law got to change, given that you get off more likely for marijuana possession than you do for domestic violence, according to Bev Gooden there?
Well, what happens with domestic violence for the most part, if it's a first offense, there is a diversion program, and then oftentimes you can have it expunged from your record if you complete the diversion program. We might need to look at that. I mean, it's a violent crime. We have a judge in Alabama right now that has a situation very similar to many of these NFLers, and you know, he should resign or be impeached in my view. I think in the end what we need to do is put more resources into training and educating and into battered women's shelters.
Okay, Bev Gooden and Jackie Speier, thank you very much for joining me.